Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Michael Vanek. The city of Welcome gained widespread attention due to a grievous crime that occurred there in 2011. When the criminals were identified, the prosecution was baffled. This notorious case became the 10th in the history of international criminal activity. During the investigation, it was discovered that the case involved followers of Satanism and occultism. Michael Vanek was born on August 14, 1987, in the city of Welcome. He became the only brother to 4 sisters: Natasha, Michelle, Bianca, and Ariana. The boy grew up in a large and close-knit family. His parents were caring and loving people who provided a decent life for their children. The head of the family worked hard and organized his own business. The mother created a favorable atmosphere in the home for the growth and development of the younger generation. Michael was sociable and kind and showed diligence in school and sports. He even earned a black belt in karate, which he was very proud of. This gave him confidence and resilience. After finishing school, the young man trained as an electrician. This in-demand profession opened the doors to good earnings and promising work. The young man worked at mine number 4 of the Beatrix mine in the small town of Thunison. He did not stop there and continued his education to become an engineer. In 2011, Michael signed up on a dating site. He did this to distract himself from a breakup and to meet new people. It appeared that fortune was on his side. One day, among the many photos and profiles, the lonely young man became interested in the profile of a sweet and smiling girl. As they corresponded, the young man discovered that their interests aligned. Like him, she disliked noisy parties and drunken gatherings, and sought true love and a strong family. Michael was pleasantly surprised to find a suitable match on the internet, especially since he still lived with his parents. He shared his joys and concerns with his mother on April 2nd. The son boasted to her that he was going on a date, and he prepared thoroughly for it to please the girl. He withdrew his first paycheck of 8,000 rand from his card. The only thing that troubled the young man was the unusual place his friend chose for their first meeting. It was the city cemetery. Apparently not to worry his parents, he kept quiet about it. Around 9 p.m. that same day, Michael said goodbye to his family and left the house. He headed to the designated place in a silver Peugeot 2007, a gift from his parents for his coming of age, as tradition demanded. The girl was a little late, but her appearance was impressive. The stranger from the internet arrived in a pristine white dress and smiled. The conversation was relaxed, after which she suggested continuing the evening further and invited the young man to a distant part of the cemetery. There, a meadow awaited them with a spread blanket. On it lay a basket of fruits and wine. After the young people had a glass each, the beautiful companion kissed a stunned Michael. Suddenly, the pleasant feeling of the kiss turned to pain and horror. The unsuspecting young man became part of a sinister plan, since the innocent appearance of his pen pal did not match her inner world. Chenet Van Heerden was born in 1991 during a crisis period for her parents. When her mother found out she was pregnant, the couple decided to delay their divorce and give their relationship another chance. However, their attempts to reconcile and improve their life together were unsuccessful. The family environment only worsened. Her mother openly disliked the little girl, seeing her as a tie to her husband. After the divorce, she took the children and moved away from her former husband. However, the failed marriage was not the main reason for her coldness. She continued to lack love and attention towards her children even after the relationship ended. All 3 children felt lonely and misunderstood, but Chenet suffered the most. She grew up withdrawn and sullen. From an early age, she exhibited psychological issues. She talked about death and drew incomprehensible pictures. Eventually, the little girl developed an imaginary friend named Azazel. Concerned about their daughter's behavior, her grandparents thought she was possessed. Thus, they decided to take her to church, where she underwent an exorcism ritual. According to a witness, her body convulsed during the prayers. In reality, Chenet was scared of crowds and clearly frightened by the ordeal. The shock could have triggered an epileptic seizure. The traumatic event deeply impacted the young girl's memory, causing her to develop a fear of the dark. Additionally, her mother once told her that toys come to life at night, which led the frightened daughter to tape her doll's eyes shut and tie their bodies with shoelaces. As she grew older, her mental condition worsened. At age 10, she nearly harmed a houseguest with a knife while visiting her father. Only after this incident did they seek psychiatric help for Chenet. Following a specialist's evaluation, she was prescribed sedatives. The medication had a positive effect on her mood and well-being. She became calmer and more friendly. During a remission period, her father spent more time with his daughter. He often picked her up from school and took her hunting with him. By sharing his hobby, he aimed to give her the attention she lacked. The unstable teenager enjoyed her father's activity. She later confessed that she found pleasure in butchering carcasses and skinning animals. This led her to bring home dead animals, starting with rats and birds, and eventually progressing to cats and dogs. She enjoyed cutting flesh and occasionally inflicted injuries on herself. During an investigation, her sister revealed that at age 12, Chenet befriended an older man who introduced her to forbidden substances and took advantage of her condition. Her sisters did not inform their parents, but Chenet ended the destructive relationship. This experience undoubtedly had a negative impact on her troubled psyche. At age 15, her mother moved to New Zealand, where she met another man and stayed with him. Over time, she never returned for her children. They remained with their father and stepmother, who tried their best to provide for the children, though they did not fully understand the severity of the youngest daughter's issues. Her behavior was largely attributed to adolescence. The situation worsened a year later when Chenet became involved with a 22-year-old young man interested in Satanism, occultism, and voodoo cults. The boyfriend became a real mentor to the impressionable young woman, but he was cruel in character, often suppressing and demeaning her. Nonetheless, a supportive family environment and psychotherapy yielded positive results. By her 17th birthday, Chenet's life began to improve. She broke off dangerous connections, graduated from high school, and enrolled in college, where she studied art and graphic design. After Chenet lost interest in Satanism and stopped using forbidden substances, her emotional state improved. She excelled in her studies and secured a job in her field. At her new job, Chenet found support not only from her colleagues, but also from management. It turned out she had a real talent for visual arts, which brought her respect and recognition in her professional field. At the same time, she started dating a man named Warren. To outsiders, her life appeared completely normal. Her family and close friends did not discuss her past, hoping that the difficult times were behind her. However, what was happening in her soul was hard to say. Perhaps her inner demons were merely lying dormant. Her father was the happiest for Chenet. He hoped that she had finally matured and would soon marry. However, his expectations were not met. The obstacle emerged from an unexpected source. Warren had a friend named Roy, who considered himself highly sensitive. Despite Chenet's sweet and friendly demeanor, he sensed something repellent and malevolent in her. Yet Roy's words were not taken seriously, as her outward appearance did not match his perceptions. One day, he pulled her aside and asked, "Who is Norman?" Each time he saw her, this name popped into the clairvoyant's mind. The young man thought she might not be faithful to his friend, so he decided to ask her directly. In response, Chenet unexpectedly spat in his face and demanded he stop bothering her with foolish questions. It later became known that Norman was the second name of Zazzle, her imaginary childhood friend. Following the incident, the dynamics between the young people changed. At one of the parties, Chenet's attention shifted to a 24-year-old named Martin. Although the young man was generally calm and sociable, there were unpleasant rumors about him. Martin Vander Marway was born into a well-off and respected family. Unlike Chenet, he had excellent relationships with both parents. As a child, he was smart and well-mannered, performing well academically. However, it turned out that since the age of 6, he had been suffering from a mental illness. Around that time, he began experiencing hallucinations. His parents recounted that, according to their son, a certain entity appeared to him, convincing the boy that he was endowed with incredible strength. Martin believed this and felt special. Gradually, his mental condition worsened and his behavior changed due to problems at school and home. At the age of 14, Vander Marway was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Unfortunately, conventional treatment did not help. Since the family was financially secure, his parents dedicated all their efforts to finding effective medications. Thanks to the efforts of both family and doctors, the necessary drugs were eventually found. With these, nearly all deviations were controlled, except for sporadic outbursts of aggression. Martin's once witnessed a stray cat being mauled by dogs, which made a deep impression on him. Instead of feeling disgust or pity, he hid the animal's body and watched it. This led him to start torturing animals. He later dropped out of school and began helping his father in the carpentry shop. In the future, Martin dreamed of continuing the family tradition. While working, his condition improved. He no longer wanted to do bad things to animals and take their lives. For this reason, he stopped taking medication. Everyone was wary of his decision, but the young man insisted that the disease had receded and that he was in control. Unfortunately, this turned out to be an inevitable mistake. His mental state gradually deteriorated. It was around this time that Martins met Chenet. These unstable young people found each other and began dating. However, outwardly they looked happy, so their parents were happy with their relationship. Of course, neither of them admitted to the problems their children had faced in the past. In the end, their union led to horrifying consequences. At first, the couple was open to the outside world, socializing and attending parties. Acquaintances recalled that they sometimes noticed cuts on the hands of the young people. They joked that they were engaged in intimate experiments. After that, they began to distance themselves from people. They became interested in Satanism, voodoo cults, and occult practices. They also became interested in infamous serial criminals. In February 2011, Martins posted a picture with Chenet on one of his social media pages. The pair were hugging, and the caption under the photo read, "Killers," with an ambiguous emoji. At the time, no one took their post seriously. Eventually, the young man asked his girlfriend's father for a marriage license. Mr. Vanhan was incredibly happy. Gradually, their sick fantasies turned into a bloodthirsty plan. The crazy couple decided to torture the homeless to death, and they practiced on animals. However, their plan was never realized, as the criminals could not find a suitable victim. Their monstrous plan was waiting for the right moment. The encounter began when Chenet posted her profile on a dating site. Before long, a young man named Michael Vanek responded. The attractive young man caught the interest of the nefarious couple, and Chenet targeted him for their plans. From the very first messages, the young people started flirting. After a few days of communication, the girl suggested they meet. Michael had been looking forward to this, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon or directly from her. Unfortunately, the somewhat unusual location for their first date didn't raise any alarms for him. Apparently, he was so eager to meet the charming conversationalist from the internet in person that he agreed to the dubious proposal. Chenet and Martin meticulously prepared to bring their wild dream to life. They thought through everything thoroughly: the attire, the means to end a life, and even the setting. Chenet approached the date fully prepared. The long-awaited meeting went exactly as planned for both parties. The victim fell for the bait. An angelic appearance of the girl and a kiss lulled his alertness. This gesture was the agreed-upon signal for Martin. All this time, the man had been hiding behind the tombstones. He approached Michael from behind and struck him with a knife. Unexpectedly for everyone, the young man resisted. The attackers hadn't anticipated this. Noticing that their new acquaintance was putting up a desperate fight, Chenet intervened. Altogether, they inflicted about 30 knife wounds on the unfortunate young man. Ultimately, completely weakened, Michael begged them to end his suffering. Martin slit Michael's throat. After that, the unthinkable began. The perpetrators dragged the body onto the blanket and proceeded with their plan. The couple severed the young man's right and left legs at the knee and decapitated him. The severed parts were placed in bags. They then decided to hide the body at the site. However, they miscalculated one thing. They had no shovels. Thus, they had to dig the earth with their hands and knives. As a result, they could not make the grave deep enough. After burying the body halfway, the perpetrators left with their trophies. Along the way, they used the victim's vehicle. Martins initially took the wheel, but later handed control over to his companion. The surge of adrenaline prevented him from keeping his eyes on the road. Upon arriving home, they stored the bags with body parts in the refrigerator as if they were groceries. After Vander Marway had somewhat recovered, he started Michael's car and drove it to a troubled neighborhood. The criminals hoped the car would be stolen, so he left it unlocked with the keys in the ignition. The next day, a cemetery worker noticed a fresh burial that wasn't there the day before. His dreadful suspicions were confirmed when he stumbled upon bloody traces and torn clothing in the bushes. He then called over his supervisor to examine the grave. What the unintended witnesses found would long remain etched in their memory. Beneath the soil lay a dismembered male body. The authorities were immediately notified of the grim discovery. At the same time, Michael's parents were beside themselves with worry. Since the previous evening, he hadn't responded to calls. Even if it was presumed that he had stayed overnight at his internet girlfriend's place, he should have made contact by now. Instead, Michael's workplace called his parents. The concerned management wanted to understand why he was absent from a crucial site. Simultaneously, the police received a report about a Peugeot 207 found abandoned in a parking lot. Passers-by were alarmed by the bloodstains on the trunk. After running the vehicle through their database, the owner was identified. Detectives also tracked that before its discovery, the car had been at the cemetery for a long time. The local precinct was already aware of an unidentified body found on its grounds. All signs were suspicious. Armed with this information, law enforcement officials went to the residence of Michael Vanek. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed their suspicions. His parents had been searching for the young man since the previous day. They asked Michael's mother to come to the cemetery, where forensic specialists and search dogs were already at work, desperately trying to locate missing body parts. At the scene, the woman recognized belongings found, and she also identified her son's body by distinctive burn marks he had sustained in childhood. During the autopsy, the medical examination revealed that the young man had suffered numerous knife wounds, with clear signs of a struggle. It was also determined that the body had been dismembered post-mortem. At least the perpetrators spared him this agony while he was alive. Notably, experts observed that the dismemberment was executed with professional precision, suggesting significant experience. There was no doubt that multiple attackers were involved, as indicated by the number and nature of the wounds and the strength required to subdue the victim. Ultimately, DNA testing confirmed the identity of 23-year-old Michael Vanek. During the investigation, police confiscated the victim's cell phone and computer. It was established that the last person the young man had communicated with was Chana Van Heerden. According to their messages, she was the one who invited him to the ominous date at the cemetery. Subsequently, detectives contacted the potential suspect and invited her to give a statement. The young woman did not refuse and arrived with her boyfriend, Martins Vander. The couple was interviewed separately. During the questioning, they confessed to being involved in the group Ending of a Life. Upon learning of the incident, the girl's father rushed to the station. He couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked his daughter if she really was involved in the accusations against her. Chana calmly confirmed and added that she would willingly do it again. She claimed she had dreamt of this ever since she started hunting with him. The cruel confession of the seemingly sweet girl shocked not only her father, but everyone present. Her boyfriend, Martins, also behaved defiantly as the case gained public attention. He did not hide his pleasure from the public scrutiny and posed for the cameras. It was clear that none of the accused felt remorse for their actions. It turned out that after the crime, if caught, the mad couple planned to end their lives, but the young man changed his mind, and his partner followed suit. They wanted to live. During the search of the young couple's apartment, police felt uneasy, to say the least. The environment was horrifying. The walls were adorned with portraits of Chenet depicting her in various guises. In some, she was depicted without eyes, in others without a mouth or ears. All images of the girl were distorted. Additionally, the rooms contained ritual items, animal scalps, knives, and various objects of unclear purpose. Also found were belongings of the deceased young man, glasses, and a wallet. As Martins later confessed, they took Michael's money to buy necessary items for their next crime. However, the most horrifying discovery awaited in the refrigerator. From it, police retrieved Michael's head with the mouth sewn shut. It was assumed that the couple planned to use the young man's head as a ritual bowl. Later on, eyes and ears of the victim were stored in separate containers. The victim's hand and leg were found buried near the murderer's home, alongside the bodies of various animals. The girl's diary contained horrific thoughts and their impending realization. From everything discovered during the inspection, it was clear that the couple planned not just one more crime. The process of ending lives and subsequent mutilation of bodies provided them with unimaginable pleasure. Martins and Chenet underwent multiple evaluations for mental competence. Fortunately, the commission confirmed that the young individuals were aware of their actions and desired the inevitable consequences. Otherwise, they might have avoided punishment and received only mandatory treatment. In November 2011, the trial concerning Chenet took place, treating her as a serial offender despite this being a singular incident. She did not hide her desire to repeat her actions. She told the court that she understands she should feel shame or remorse, but for some reason, she does not comprehend the gravity of her actions through her own moral compass. She can only grasp the severity of her deeds through societal standards and the reactions of others. Psychiatrists declared that the defendant suffers from psychopathic and antisocial disorders, making her apparently more dangerous than her boyfriend, but she is adept at concealing it. Throughout the sentencing, she remained impassive. Chenet Van Heerden was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole, 20 years for ending a life, and an additional 15 for robbery and dismemberment. As for Martins, unlike his partner, he defended himself in court. He claimed not to remember the events that occurred until he found himself in jail and behaved arrogantly and aggressively. The defendant admitted to studying Satanism and occultism, trying to understand life and death. He said his relationship with Chenet pushed them both towards committing the crime. During the trial, he apologized to the victim's parents, although his words sounded insincere. He implied that the victim was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, although in reality, the mad couple had lured the unfortunate man into a premeditated trap. The victim's mother could not contain her distress and struck the accused during one of the sessions. Ultimately, Martins Vander was also found guilty of the charges against him and sentenced to 35 years in prison, but with a chance for parole after serving half of his sentence. Until 2014, the lovers kept in touch behind bars. In his letters, Martins called Chenet a dark goddess, writing, "Lady Blackmore, when you part your lips, words of a dead butterfly spill out. They fall upon my mystical heart and paint it with sweet poison, spreading beautiful darkness through my empty veins." Over time, Chenet ended the relationship with her former lover, feeling that they had grown cold and distant from each other. It is known that in prison, the woman behaves exemplarily, teaching her fellow inmates art and theology. Collectors fascinated by the lives of humanity's worst maniacs and offenders have paid large sums for a photograph of the woman with her autograph, as well as a print of her hand. What is also monstrous in this story is how many troubled individuals there are among us. Sometimes behind an innocent facade lies sheer hell. New acquaintances do not always positively affect our lives. Sometimes they can mark a point of no return. In 2012, at the Summer Olympics in London, the star of a young Puerto Rican boxer, Felix Verdejo Sanchez, shone brightly. He was called a diamond, one of the most promising athletes of his country. He was predicted to win titles and gold medals. Then it seemed to everyone that this talented and motivated young man will reach fantastic heights in sports. In 2021, the name of the boxer again traveled all the world's media, but this time fell into the section of criminal chronicles. This story is about a teenage attachment that grew into a kind of addiction and led to a terrible tragedy, and also about how the author of the main knockout of 2014, who was praised and promoted by two-time Olympic champion Vasyl Lomachenko, almost received a death sentence, but eventually went to prison for life. It is noteworthy that despite the presence of irrefutable evidence and confessions of the boxer's accomplice, he himself to this day refuses to plead guilty. The future star of world boxing was born in the Puerto Rican city of San Juan in 1993 on May 19th. He grew up in a rather modest large family and from an early age was fond of port. True, in childhood, he planned to connect his life with baseball, but his further fate was determined by a funny incident. When the boy was 9 years old, a family friend came to visit them with his son of the same age. The boys were playing in the yard, but suddenly quarreled and a fight broke out. Parents separated the children, and the father of the future athlete noted that if he wants to fight with someone in the future, let him wear boxing gloves. After that fight, Felix, at his request, was taken to a local gym, where the boy, as he later admitted himself, from the first training session fell in love with boxing. At the age of 16, he won the Pan American Junior Championships. A year later, he won his country's championship, and a year later, he went to the Olympic Games in London, where he reached the quarterfinals. In the same year began his brilliant career in the professional ring. In total, Verdejo had 29 fights, gaining 27 confident victories, and in 2014 he was recognized as the author of the best knockout in the fight against Sergio Villanueva. A year later, Felix won his first championship belt with the WBO Latino title, which he subsequently defended 6 more times in 2 years. Everyone who saw him in the fight had no doubt. This young man will write his name in the history of world boxing. And now let's get to know Keishla Rodriguez. The girl was born in November 1993 in San Juan. The full name given to her at birth is Keishla Marlene Rodriguez Ortiz. Her parents, Jose and Kayla Rodriguez, had another common daughter, Beraliz Nicole, and also the couple raised Kayla's son, Jonathan, from a previous marriage of a woman. Keishla grew up an open and sociable girl. She did well in school and adored animals, dreaming of becoming a veterinarian in the future. Her best friend was her sister Beraliz, to whom she confided all her secrets and worries. Keishla studied in the same school with Felix Verdejo, who was her age. Young people were acquainted since childhood, and in adolescence between them began a romantic relationship. In 2011, Rodriguez's parents divorced and separated. Kayla moved to relatives in Florida, and her daughters, who were by then already adults, decided to stay in San Juan. Despite the fact that each of the sisters had long since lived their own lives, they continued to stay in close contact and told each other about everything that was happening to them. At the age of 18, a promising boxer, who was already managed to take part in the Olympic Games, had an affair with a young schoolgirl and aspiring model, Elisa Maria Santiago Sierra. At that time, the girl was only 14 years old, and she was still in school. But even then, she made big plans for the future with a promising and world-famous athlete. In addition, Eliza's parents were not at all against this relationship. Attractive and talented Felix, who has always had a lot of fans, becoming a boxing star, literally bathed in the rays of fame and was surrounded by female attention. He did not miss the opportunity to spin a novel or a passing affair on the side, and also, despite the serious relationship with Eliza, continued to meet with his school friend Keishla. Keishla's sister, Beraliz, and her mother, Kayla Rodriguez, knew about the affair and did not approve of the relationship. In addition, the situation was very ambiguous. On the one hand, Eliza considered herself the only woman and great love of the athlete, was preparing for the wedding and made far-reaching plans for their joint future. On the other hand, Keishla knew that the lover has a fiancé, but at the same time, Felix did not let her go. On top of that, he was her first great love, and deep down, the naive girl herself still hoped to be the one. In 2016, the boxer did marry the young Eliza, who at that time was barely 19 years old. Eliza by that time was already quite a famous model, had tens of thousands of followers in social networks, and also opened her own beauty studio for eyelash extensions. In August of the same year, just a few months after the wedding, the athlete got into a serious car accident when he was rushing on his motorcycle. He was taken to the hospital in serious condition with head injuries, bruises, and lacerations. His trainer, Ricky Marquez, seriously feared that his talented charge would go off the rails at the height of his career. But Felix, contrary to the disappointing prognosis, made a rapid recovery and soon returned to the ring. In September 2019, the boxer published in his profile in the social network a picture with Elise, who was in a large term of pregnancy. In the comment to the photo, he wrote, "Soon I will meet my daddy's princess." And a month later, he announced the birth of a daughter, who was given the name Miranda Verdejo Santiago. The young man in public looked like a loving husband, caring father, and an exemplary family man. But secretly from his wife, he continued to meet with Keishla, who could not let go. As Eliza later admitted, she guessed that her husband was cheating on her, but every time he tearfully vowed to leave his mistress. Keishla repeatedly tried to break off this painful relationship, but Felix would not let her go. She had no other men, because the boxer threatened that if he found out about the fact that Keishla had someone, not good for her and her chosen one, Keishla herself, who had fallen in love with Verdejo since high school, continued to love him despite everything. Rodriguez, as planned, connected her life with the care of animals and got a job at the Center of Veterinary Medicine and Aesthetics. Colleagues described her as conscientious, hard-working, and very responsible. She lived with 2 dogs and a cat, which she simply adored. In 2020, Eliza discovered the correspondence of her husband with several mistresses, including Keishla. The wife gave her husband a scandal and threw him out of the house, threatening that she would file for divorce and forbid him to see his daughter. Eliza's threats had an effect. In addition, in the career of the athlete at that time, there was a serious decline and unnecessary problems where he did not need. For a while, he really stopped seeing Rodriguez, but Felix still did not let her go, trying to control almost every step Keishla. After a few months of secret visits resumed, and in April 2021, Keishla discovered that she was pregnant. She bought a rapid test at the drugstore, which only confirmed her fears. She first called her sister, who was aware of her complicated relationship with the athlete, and told her everything. It was out of the question to have an abortion because Keishla was already 27 years old, and she was ready to have a child, even if she had to raise it on her own. A few days later, Keishla broke the news to the father of her child, hoping in her heart that he would accept it. But Felix was not happy, to put it mildly. He got angry and told his mistress that she should go to the doctor, and if the pregnancy is confirmed, it will be necessary to have an abortion. Naturally, Rodriguez answered him with a firm refusal, but the boxer began to threaten her and insist. Felix said that an illegitimate child will finally destroy his reputation, and this he cannot allow. After Keishla's visit to the hospital, her pregnancy was confirmed, and she now had a certificate to prove it. She called Felix and told him everything, which made him furious. Felix shouted and demanded that Keishla immediately get rid of the child, but she again responded with a categorical refusal. Then the athlete decided to go on the sly, saying that he did not believe her and wanted to personally look at the issued medical certificate. He appointed Keishla a meeting in the evening in a crowded place, which did not surprise her, because they always tried not to draw attention to themselves and did not get in front of anyone. A few days before the meeting, the boxer stopped by his old friend Luis Antonio Cadiz, who worked in a local machine shop and also had ties with the criminal world, selling illegal drugs. Felix briefly outlined the situation and asked him to help him get rid of his pregnant mistress. Luis had previously been in the field of vision of the police, and the prospect of being in prison scared him. But the athlete was persistent, assured that everything would go smoothly, and the police will never come out on them. Besides, Felix promised him an impressive cash reward, and Luis agreed, with the support of an accomplice. Felix called Keishla and told her that he wanted to meet her on the evening of April 29th to confirm her pregnancy and decide what to do next. Immediately after talking to her lover, Keishla called her sister back and told her everything. She still had hope that Felix would accept her child and would not insist on an abortion. But Berylise, all this situation, is quite alarmed. She knew that the boyfriend had threatened her sister, and she was worried that he wouldn't do anything to her. Berylise called her mother and shared her concerns, but even together they could not dissuade Keishla from that fateful meeting. At the appointed time, Rodriguez, taking a doctor's note, arrived at the meeting in her own Kia Forte automobile. Verdejo drove there in his pickup truck, in the back of which Luis was hiding. Keishla immediately got into the athlete's car and showed him the results of the tests. He once again talked about terminating the pregnancy, but Keishla, crying, again responded with a refusal. Against this background, the couple began to quarrel violently, turning to shouting. Then Felix suddenly hit Keishla in the head with his fist, from which she immediately lost consciousness. Until Keishla regained consciousness, Felix took a syringe with a large dose of illegal substances hidden in the glove compartment of the car, which Luis had obtained at his request, and injected Keishla. Then, together with his accomplice, they carried her to the back of the car, where there were already prepared pieces of wire and a concrete block. The men tied Rodriguez up, attached the load, and then covered her with a tarp so that no one would accidentally see anything. Felix then returned to the pickup truck while his accomplice got behind the wheel of Keishla's vehicle. Together, they drove to the bridge over the San Jose Lagoon. It was virtually deserted at night, and the men, making sure no one could see them, threw Keishla, still alive, into the water. Afterward, however, they decided to fire a few test shots in pursuit, using the firearms they had brought with them so as not to leave the victim any chance. Having finished the massacre, each of the perpetrators went home. Keishla's co-workers were the first to worry when she didn't show up at the Veterinary Medicine and Aesthetics Center the next day. Keishla has always been very responsible and couldn't just not show up for work without notifying anyone. Since she didn't answer the phone, it was decided to contact her sister to find out what happened. After several unsuccessful attempts to contact her sister, she went to her house. No one answered the door, but Berylise had a spare key, so she got in without difficulty. However, she was met only by hungry animals who had not eaten anything for almost 24 hours. Now Berylise was already in a panic because she realized that something terrible or irreparable had happened to Keishla. She immediately called her mother and told her everything, and then reported to the police about her suspicions and threats to her sister. She also called Felix, but he claimed that he had spent the previous evening and night at home with his family and had not gone to any meeting. The missing girl's mother took the first flight from Florida to San Juan. She thought that her lover might have taken her daughter to a private clinic and paid for her to have an abortion without her consent. Kayla didn't even want to think about the fact that Keishla was no longer alive. The first thing to do was to question the missing girl's neighbors and co-workers, but they didn't notice anything suspicious and couldn't provide the investigation with any useful information. In parallel, messages about the disappearance of Rodriguez were posted on popular social networks with requests to respond to those who know anything about her fate or current whereabouts. The case quickly received wide publicity, and when it became known that the missing girl was in a long-term relationship with a famous athlete and was expecting a child from him, reporters literally lined up to interview any of Rodriguez's family members. The relatives did not hold anything back and spoke out about their suspicions, among other things, blaming Felix for the incident. On April 30th, Keishla's car was found abandoned on the east side of the city, with her documents and personal belongings inside. No signs of struggle were found in the interior, giving a faint hope of finding its owner alive. On May 1st, a passerby strolling on the bridge over the lagoon saw a strange shape resembling a human body in the shallow water. He reported his discovery to the police, who soon recovered from the water the body of a young woman, presumably the same one the whole city had been looking for several days. Members of the Rodriguez family, who arrived to identify the body, hoped to the last that it was not Keishla, but their hopes were not realized. The body had been in the water for several days and changed a lot. But the girl was immediately identified by a remarkable tattoo on her arm. When news of the gruesome discovery hit the press, the residents of the city revolted and began to go out to spontaneous rallies, demanding punishment for those responsible. The same day, Verdejo was detained and taken to the police station for questioning, but the athlete categorically denied his involvement and claimed that on the night of Keishla's disappearance, he was at home with his family. As there was nothing to charge him, Felix was released on his own recognizance. One of the key witnesses was the athlete's legal wife, who at the first interrogation admitted that she was aware of his affair with Keishla, but that she had heard about her rival's pregnancy for the first time. On top of that, she did not confirm her husband's alibi, saying that he was not at home on the night of the murder. The first thing investigators did was check traffic surveillance footage on the way to the bridge from which Keishla was thrown. That's how they found Felix's pickup truck and the victim's car traveling behind each other. But the Kia Forte was clearly not driven by its owner. On the same day, the boxer's car was seized for examination, and in its body they found some hair of the deceased. Luis was the first to surrender to the police, promising to tell the whole truth in exchange for a reduced sentence. Felix was also taken into custody, but he refused to cooperate with the investigation, did not answer questions, and continued to deny his guilt, despite the presence of irrefutable evidence. A firearm was seized from Felix, which he used to shoot the victim from the bridge, and for which he had an official permit. Also, a cell phone check confirmed the fact that Felix, Luis, and Keishla were in the same location on that fateful night. Keishla's final farewell was on May 8th, and the funeral ceremony was all over the national news. It was a kind of action, calling for the perpetrators of the tragedy to be punished to the full extent of the law, as well as an action to draw public attention to the problem of gender violence. The coffin with Rodriguez's body was brought to the cemetery not in a traditional hearse, but in a white carriage, over which white flower petals were thrown from the air. Many famous Puerto Rican natives, including show business stars, athletes, politicians, and public figures, have spoken out about the high-profile incident. Verdejo was charged with carjacking, kidnapping, premeditated murder, and the murder of an unborn child. All of these crimes together carried the death penalty, but the relatives of the deceased from the very beginning asked the court to elect a sentence of life imprisonment for the killer, so that he would suffer in captivity for the rest of his life. The hearing was repeatedly postponed due to the worldwide coronavirus pandemic, but in the spring of 2021, the trial was held in virtual mode. The court found that the crime was committed by a group of persons by prior conspiracy and with particular cruelty against a pregnant woman. It was possible to reconstruct the chain of events of that night and the details of the crime, mainly thanks to the testimony of Luis, who did not deny his guilt. He admitted that it was he who, at the request of a friend, got the drug for injection and also brought a wire and a concrete block to get rid of the body. But Felix continued to insist on his non-involvement in the case, although his words could not seriously affect the situation. By the way, the wife of the boxer, who acted in court as a witness, almost immediately after the arrest of her husband filed for divorce and tried to abstract from what was happening, focusing on the development of his business and raising a young daughter. According to some reports, not so long ago, Elisa Santiago remarried. Elisa herself admitted in an interview that she repeatedly received anonymous calls and messages with death threats, as well as death wishes to her and even Miranda. Many considered it was the spouse of the athlete as the organizer of the crime, but no evidence was found. In the summer of 2023, it became known that the jury, having familiarized itself with all the evidence and heard the testimony of all the witnesses, was finally ready to announce the final verdict. Felix Verdejo and his accomplice Luis Cadiz were found guilty on each of the charges against them. But despite this, the killers have not yet been sentenced. The next court hearing is scheduled for mid-November 2023. Most likely, both men involved in the deaths of Keishla Rodriguez and her unborn child will likely go to prison for life, with no right to ever leave prison. The case of a young British woman, Bernal, made headlines across Europe in 2005 and became a precedent for the adoption of a number of laws and amendments aimed at protecting women who have been persecuted. Unfortunately, the gravity of her situation was not immediately appreciated, and her numerous appeals to the police had little effect. Moreover, the key witnesses to the nightmare were not even questioned, and the stalker himself denied his guilt and was released, which was a fatal mistake. In this story, no one was ever punished, because the man obsessed with the woman, having killed the object of his lust, decided to go after her, putting a bullet in his head. The saddest thing is that this tragedy could have been avoided because Claire had been asking for help from the valiant officers of the law for months. She herself made attempts to escape from the pursuer, changing phone numbers and place of residence, but he every time found her, and the nightmare continued until the tragic denouement of September 13, 2005. Who was Clara Bernal? Clara Bernal was born in 1983, August 18th, in a small village called Groombridge, on the border between Kent and East Sussex in England, where almost all of her childhood and adolescence. Very little is known about the woman's parents. She was raised by her mother, Trisha Bernal, but the birth father of the only daughter with whom the woman was divorced did not take any part in the life and education of his own child, and was never interested in her faith. From childhood, Claire was a sociable, smiling, and open-minded girl. She studied at St. Gregory's Catholic School, where she was among the best students, danced, and was fond of fine arts. She then attended private Kent College, where she earned a bachelor's degree in science. Communicative and friendly woman, easily became the soul of any company. She always had a lot of friends, and others spoke of her only positively. At the same time, she was always cautious, prudent, and prudent enough, had no bad habits, chose her surroundings carefully, and did not befriend dubious personalities. As a teenager, Claire had a good understanding of cosmetics. During her student years, she worked part-time as a makeup artist, creating bright and beautiful images, and later decided to connect her life with this very activity. She graduated from specialized courses in cosmetology and the art of makeup, and also learned the basics of working with theatrical makeup. All these skills helped the girl to get her dream job. She was hired as a beauty and style consultant in the elite store Knightsbridge, recently opened in the luxury department store Harvey Nichols. For the job, Bernal moved to live in London. There, she rented an apartment with 2 friends, because rent in the capital is not a cheap pleasure, even despite the quite decent salary she received in the store. The girl quickly won the respect of colleagues and even engaged in teaching newcomers, because she knew best of all in decorative cosmetics and skincare issues. Clara was characterized as a professional, attentive to details, patient and pleasant woman with a good heart. She loved life in the capital, saw plenty of opportunities to realize her talents, gain new skills and experience, tried not to miss anything, and live life to the fullest. 3 fateful dates. During her first few months at Harvey Nichols, Claire met a man named Michael Peck. He worked there in security and was a senior security guard. He immediately liked Claire. Michael began to give her all sorts of signs of attention. He was also good-looking, seemed to be a serious man, and at first tried to behave unobtrusively. However, Peck was not as simple as it might seem at first glance. At that time, he was already 30 years old, and his past had many dark spots. The man was a citizen of 2 countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. He was once a soldier. He deserted, and then hurriedly moved to the UK to avoid responsibility. In his home country, he was left with a wife, from whom he was in the process of divorce, and a young child, in whom he had no interest at all. Michael spoke with a strong accent, but it even gave him a certain charm. He was tall, sturdy, smiling, joking a lot, and able to impress women. The guard started courting Claire, and the girl was flattered by his attention. About a month they just sweet-talked and saw only at work in the department store. However, when Michael invited Claire on a date, she willingly agreed, which actually signed her death warrant. Their first meeting took place in a cozy London coffee shop, where they sat until late in the evening, chatting about life and tell each other about themselves. Even then, Petch admitted to his companion that he is married, but noted that he would try to divorce his wife as soon as possible because he wants to be only with Claire for the rest of his life. His sudden confession, he somewhat embarrassed the girl, but at that point she decided that he must be joking. When Bernal told her mother all about it, the woman also thought it strange. She didn't like the fact that her daughter's suitor was a foreigner, 8 years older and married. Tricia told her daughter that it was better not to meet with this man, but she did not feel threatened and assured her parent that everything was fine. On the second date, the man called Claire to an amusement park, gave her a gorgeous bouquet of flowers, constantly showered her with compliments, and in parting kissed her and confessed his love. Claire was confused. She again could not understand whether Petch was joking. In the evening, she called her mother and shared her worries, to which she again advised her daughter to stop communicating with this guy. Claire agreed with her parent that this behavior is a bit strange, but noted that she likes Michael, and perhaps she needs to get to know him better. Therefore, when a week later the guard again invited the woman on a date, she again agreed. True, this time he was too persistent, confessed his love, and told his companion that he would never let her go again. Now Bernal was not only confused and discouraged, but somewhat frightened. She had decided that this was their last date with Michael, and she would not continue her relationship with him any longer. Their affair, if you can call it that, lasted less than 1 month, and in all that time the couple only had 3 dates, but even that was enough for Petch to decide that Claire belonged to him from now on. From that moment on, Claire's life became a nightmare. In love or obsessed. Soon Michael took a vacation and went to the Czech Republic for a couple of weeks to meet there with his wife and solve the issue of divorce, which, by the way, he did not manage to do. Bernal, during this time, almost stopped thinking about him, lived her old life, and believed that Petch remained in the past until one evening he did not call her. The man asked the girl to meet him at the airport, and when she refused, he pressed on pity, saying that he needed help. Claire went to meet him, and even agreed to accommodate him for a day, as he, according to him, moved out of the rented apartment, and in a new one could move in only the next day. Nevertheless, having crossed the threshold of the woman's dwelling, Michael said that he planned to stay with her and wanted them to live together from now on. Claire, his words, not on a joke, frightened, and she asked him to immediately leave the apartment, but the man refused to do so. Then the girl and her neighbors threatened to call the police if Petch did not leave immediately. He left, but remained sitting on the doorstep, where he stayed until the morning. The next day at work, Bernal tried to talk to her boyfriend and explained to him that between them all over and those 3 dates did not mean much. But Michael did not even want to listen to her and just asked to give him another chance to fix everything and prove the sincerity of his feelings. He brought a huge bouquet of scarlet roses and walked Claire home with them, despite the fact that she refused to accept the flowers. The guard again sat on the doorstep of her apartment all night, and when the neighbor tried to drive him away, he threatened that it would be easier for him to kill Claire than to let her go. It was clear from his crazed look that he wasn't lying, and he was dead serious. Despite the fact that Michael spoke of his love, he looked and acted as if he were obsessed with one single obsession, to possess the object of his lust. Bernal tried to behave calmly, and a couple of times tried to talk to the ex-boyfriend to explain to him that she had no feelings for him, and regretted that she even agreed to go with him on those 3 dates. But Michael, hearing this, hugged her tightly to him and whispered in her ear that she loved him, but she just didn't realize it yet. Then he tried to kiss Claire, but she managed to break free of his embrace. 6 months of nightmare and police inaction. The following months were, without exaggeration, the worst of Claire's life. She admitted to her mother that she no longer feels safe, lives in constant tension, does not know what to expect, and literally balances on the verge of a nervous breakdown. At work, Michael walked by her store all day long and kept looking at Claire. He called her dozens of times a day and sent her up to 50 messages, in which then confessed his love, asked for forgiveness, and begged to return to him, then went to explicit threats and promises that they will still be together. Claire had changed her phone number several times, but it usually took Posh no more than a couple of days to find out her new number. The worst part was that he knew where she lived and was constantly on duty at her house. At one point, the desperate woman attempted to change her residence, but the guards secretly followed her after work and found out her new address, so the harassment continued. Michael was obviously convinced that he and Claire were still in a relationship. He counted how many months had passed since their first meeting, first date, first kiss, and suggested that they celebrate these small dates. In his messages, the man repeatedly wrote that if Claire didn't belong to him, no one would have her at all, and he would take care of it. Claire cried every day. She could no longer concentrate on her work. She was afraid to go out. She flinched at every phone call, and at night, she began to have nightmares. She lost a lot of weight, looked confused, and became a shadow of her old self. Claire's mother, friends, and colleagues all told her to go to the police, and she finally agreed. To begin with, she approached the head of security at the mall where she worked. He had once been a police officer, so he took the employee's complaint seriously. The man talked to other employees and watched a lot of surveillance videos and was convinced that Pesh was really stalking Bernal. The head of security then ordered the problematic security guard to be moved to another floor and to the far wing, but that didn't stop him and had little effect on the situation. Michael spent almost all of his time outside the Knightsbridge store watching Claire. Then the management of the department store found no other way but to dismiss the employee who does not fulfill his direct duties. This did not stop the harassment, and Claire, despite the threats of Pesh, still decided to go to the police. However, when questioned, the man categorically denied the fact of harassment, claiming that he did not want anything bad, but only tried to make amends to Claire so that they were together again. According to him, he did not threaten her at all, but because of his accent, she could have misunderstood and misinterpreted his words. The police also listened to Bernal's version of events, but did not communicate with her colleagues and roommates, who were direct witnesses to all the events, and could confirm that Michael had been stalking her for months and repeatedly threatened to kill her. The law enforcement officers considered the situation to be non-serious and not posing any threat to the woman's life or health. They did not make an official risk assessment, and the stalker got off with a small fine and a warning. He was also banned from the shopping center where Claire worked and from approaching her. However, just a day after Pesh was questioned and notified of the ban on approaching Claire, he was back at her house, peering intently through the windows. Bernal called the police when she saw him, but by the time the police arrived, the man had already left, and the officers of the law only gave him the benefit of the doubt and took no action. The calm before the tragedy. On June 10, 2005, the girl again went to the police because of Michael's harassment and violation of the prohibition on approaching. But he again disappeared before the law enforcers arrived, and they again were unwilling to do anything, showing criminal negligence. On the third time, the man was still arrested, but he offered no resistance, behaved calmly, and silently held out his hands, allowing himself to be handcuffed. He was charged with stalking and harassment and sent to jail, where he spent a week before being released on bail. The trial in the case was scheduled for August 31st, 2005, but before that, Claire decided to take a vacation to get some rest and distraction. She went with her mother and a friend to one of the popular Italian resorts, where they had a great time enjoying the warm sea and gentle sun. At one point, it even seemed to the woman that the whole nightmare was over. When Claire returned to London, she was amazed to find that Michael was no longer following her. He was nowhere to be found. At that moment, she was greatly relieved and simply lost her guard. However, Bernal had no idea what her tormentor was doing and what he was preparing for her. In the meantime, Pesh had gone to his native land, where he visited shooting ranges every day, honing his skill with weapons. He underwent special training and received a permit to buy a pistol. The man smuggled the firearms into the UK, and after arriving, he never attempted to meet Claire before the scheduled court hearing. In the courtroom, he behaved calmly, pleaded guilty, apologized, and assured that he meant no harm. Pesh was again released and actually received no punishment. The next 2 weeks passed quietly, and Claire finally convinced herself that it was over and Michael would not bother her again. Crime in a high-end department store. September 13, 2005, was an ordinary Tuesday. The day was drawing to a close, and Claire kept glancing at her watch. She was going on a date with her new boyfriend in the evening. She was in a good mood, and there was no sign of trouble. She was having a nice conversation with a colleague, telling her about her plans, when a strange sound was heard in the store from the side of the service entrance. As Pesh had worked as a senior security guard for a long time, he was well aware of all the emergency entrances and exits as well as the service areas and entered the building undetected. He appeared suddenly, as if he had grown behind Claire's back. When her partner saw the man, she didn't even have time to say anything. Bernal obviously realized from her friend's face that something was wrong, but at that moment a shot rang out. Michael drew his gun and fired the first shot into the back of Claire's head, almost point blank, and when she fell to the floor, he fired 3 more bullets into her face. The sound of the gunshots caused panic in the store. People started screaming, running, and hiding. Everyone expected the gunman to come out into the lobby and start firing indiscriminately at customers. But instead, the man fired 1 more shot into the ceiling, then put the muzzle to his temple and pulled the trigger, ending his own life. Pesh had fulfilled his gruesome promise. The girl he'd been stalking for almost a year and whose life he'd literally poisoned was gone, but he was determined not to live without her. When medics and law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, there was no one left to save or arrest. Consequences. On that fateful evening, Trisha Bernal was at her sister's birthday party and returned home late. As she drove up, she saw the police at the front door and immediately realized that something terrible had happened. When she was told that Claire had been taken from her life, she asked, "It was Pesh, wasn't it?" and then covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Later, the woman recalled that she did not have a bad feeling that night. She did not feel anxious and could not even imagine that right now, her only child was being taken away from her. Although earlier, she had always thought that she would feel if Claire was in danger and would be able to protect her daughter. Trisha also added that her heiress saw only good in people because she herself carried only light and goodness to those around her. The examination showed that Michael was under the influence of illegal substances at the time of the crime. Moreover, a few months before the tragedy, he consulted with one of the employees of the department store, who studied at the law faculty of one of the prestigious London universities, about what punishment is provided by law for the crime and what circumstances can be considered mitigating. This became known to other colleagues, including Claire herself. The woman was frightened by what was happening and reported to the police that the ex-boyfriend may be planning to take her life. But no action the officers of the law did not want to take. In general, the crime itself and all the events that preceded it were the result of negligence of law enforcement officers, who for almost a year could not assess the seriousness of the situation. Despite Claire's regular appeals for help and in search of protection, Pesh was arrested twice but released each time on symbolic bail, violated a prescribed prohibition against approaching the woman, openly threatened her with physical violence, and even consulted a lawyer about punishment. However, all of this, according to the police, was not enough to send the man to jail. Moreover, he was able to leave the country without hindrance, purchase weapons, and return with them to carry out his murderous plan. At the same time, even key witnesses, colleagues and roommates, who personally heard the guard threatening Claire, were not questioned during the whole time. It was only when Michael took the life of his victim and took his own life along with her that law enforcement realized how serious the situation was and how many mistakes they had made. Tricia decided not to let it go and to get justice. She joined forces with other grieving families who had lost loved ones in similar circumstances. Together, they launched a national program to help victims of stalking. Also, thanks to their efforts, the law was amended, and stalking was reclassified as a criminal offense. And in 2012, a new law was passed that completely banned stalking. A helpline was also set up for victims who did not receive proper support and protection from the police. With the help of Tricia Bernal, several documentaries were made about the last months of her daughter's life and about that brutal crime right in the workplace. The woman has also made numerous appearances on popular television programs, urging victims of harassment not to remain silent about their plight and not to take it lightly.